So I watched ContraPoints' video about the Avengers, and just for full disclosure, I haven't seen the Avengers yet, so I'll just try not to comment on the movie itself at all. This is more of a meta-commentary about the genre of video blogging, movie, and media reviews, of which I, in the past, have been a contributing member. I guess my problem with Nicotine's attempt at critiquing this movie is that he's like applying his own sort of pet academic theories as if, you know, they are the frame which, you know, will explain the movie. And there's a saying that the map is not the territory, and I think all of these frames are sort of limiting no matter how much you try and synthesize them. One of my favorite movie reviews I've ever seen was actually The Amazing Atheist, when he was on the that guy with the glasses site as the distressed watcher. His review of the Star Wars movies are actually some of the favorite movie reviews of people that, you know, are common video bloggers on YouTube. I also like Lacey Green's review of The Hunger Games because she dealt with the concept of themes, although I have yet to see The Hunger Games because I really don't make it to the movies that often. But I had a few minor problems with just several people with their ideas of limiting the metaphor of any given movie to contemporary events and contemporary politics. I think that's kind of ignorant, to be honest. Not that I'm an expert in mythology and cross-cultural storytelling. I mostly just piggyback off Joseph Campbell and a few other writers. Nonetheless, I recognize that some of these ideas run further back and deeper than the sort of, you know, analysis of trying to make parallels with modern times would suggest a lot of these people suggest in their video reviews. So I'm going to play a clip from Nicotine or ContraPoints talking about the Avengers.
So if you're going to go to a movie with a Marxist frame of reference, you're going to think of the movie as ideology. That is, you're going to think of it as this sort of illusion that exists to justify the ruling class, or the currently existing relations of power, and you're going to view this movie as a kind of cultural apparatus, an apparatus that serves to reinforce and to justify and to naturalize and to normalize basically the relations of power that exist. And so if you approach it that way, you're going to see how these tropes keep recurring that are reminiscent of various political tropes. Like every single superhero movie that has been made since 9/11, and even a lot of ones before that, have basically been just manifestations of Americans' fear about terrorism. And it's especially since 9/11, it's taken a specifically 9/11 themed turn. So most of these movies tend to take a New York or New York substitute, and often there's shots of police officers and firefighters in the streets with smoke and flame, and it's all supposed to call back that 9/11 imagery that is used to justify going to wars in this country, and it's also apparently used to justify the meaningless video game violence that we see in these movies. And
in other words, if you go into the movie with the bias that everything is propaganda, cultural propaganda, if you walk into the movie with that as a foregone conclusion, you will come out with an analysis that is consistent with the Marxist framework. I think that my problem with this, without even getting into the issue of Marxism itself, is just to say that it's a bias, and Nicotine's own sense of like self-confirmation goes hand in hand with that. Well, I subscribe to this pet theory, and I view everything through that frame, and thus I go to the movies and I see it, and look, I found the little, you know, hidden message in it, and I see through this capitalist propaganda. Of course, many of these tropes and stories predate any of our current political ideologies. That's something that I don't think that Marxism would necessarily explain that well, but I'm not an expert in Marxism. Just a point.
The other main hermeneutic critical approach to movies, I think, is Freudian. That's what I use. Not people don't usually read Freud these days, but I still read him because I'm weird. And I guess with a Freudian approach to cinema, you sort of treat a movie like you treat a dream. So if you use Freud's method of dream analysis, you're going to look for things like wish fulfillment in movies. And I guess this is where feminist kind of criticisms that I've done before come in also. Because if a movie is a dream, then you want to know whose dream it is. And you can usually figure that out very easily just by looking for the kinds of wishes that are being fulfilled, if you want to stick to that strict Freudian dogma about wish fulfillment. And clearly, for instance, it's men's wishes being fulfilled, which is why the protagonist always gets the girl, because that's the man's wish. The man wants to have sex with that girl that he wants to have sex with, and so it happens in the movie. The men watching the movie identify with the protagonist, and then the protagonist has sex with the girl, and the man vicariously enjoys that. Because the Avengers doesn't have any protagonists. Instead, what we have is we see this scene where this attractive woman who's sort of artfully and meticulously disheveled comes in the news and says, "Oh, whoever saved the city, I'd really like to thank them." And with this thanking, there's obviously a heavy sexual implication. So there you have the wish fulfillment of the male audience, the dreamers, as we could call them.
First of all, I'm under the understanding that the entire universe is Vishnu's dream, but, no wait, that's Hinduism, I'm sorry. I guess my problem with this sort of Freudian feminist analysis of movies is that it sort of denies the possibility of dual wish fulfillment. So, for example, in ancient Rome, rich women would pay to have sex with top gladiators, and, there's rock stars have groupies, athletes, professional athletes, and celebrities of all sorts have, groupies and that sort of thing. And, of course, I think that what Nick would probably try and suggest is this has to do with the culture of patriarchy and cultural brainwashing and doublethink on their parts. Their conscious impulses and desires are merely fabrications of the social structure, and etc., etc. But yeah, why is it so improbable to think that female reporter actually would want to personally thank the superheroes, given that, what I said in ancient Roman culture and that sort of thing, it's not as, American capitalist, blah, 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 as these sorts of critiques would lead you to believe.
And I guess there's kind of a conflict between the Freudian and the Marxian way of viewing film, because if it's Freudian, then we should view the film as the kind of projection of collective consciousness. All our wishes, our fears, our anxieties, a fear of terrorism, want to have sex with that girl, that all comes up. Then, from a Marxian interpretation, we should be looking at how the film justifies and naturalizes, how it is basically constituted by the ideology of the ruling power. And those two seem to be contradictory, because in the Freudian account, the film is a projection of the people, and in the Marxian account, the film is sort of an imposition, a bit of propaganda against the people. But I think the two can be synthesized, because if the collective consciousness of the people is itself a justification, a naturalization, a normalization of the kinds of social or spiritual facts that are going to serve to justify the dominance of the ruling class, then the projection of the people's consciousness is itself a kind of ideology for the ruling class.
So, in other words, the ruling class rules by giving the people what they want? Well, that actually kind of makes sense in a number of ways. I mean, how many wars for oil would we get into if we didn't use oil? How many wars for oil did we get into before we used oil? Ask yourself that question.
And I suppose a third way you could approach this is by sort of analyzing the way the other groups are portrayed. By other groups, I mean the groups that aren't stupid American men. That's what I've concluded about most, especially action movies. They're really made for stupid American men. Why? Not so much in the Avengers, because there are no characters, but in action movies that have characters, usually the main character is kind of an idiot. He's very American, very unsophisticated, and he has some kind of opponent. And the opponent often is going to have an English accent, maybe, and he's going to like classical music, and he's going to drink wine, and he probably is like really smart and sophisticated, and so the whole movie's about the triumph of this strong dumb idiot beating up this fancy, um, culturally knowledgeable sophisticate. And so it makes stupid people feel good about themselves, and that's the purpose of the action movie.
I think that if we watch carefully in this clip, we've seen something of the reason why Nick really doesn't like these movies. Is because in his eyes they're anti-intellectual, and in his eyes he is the villain character. He is this literate classical music listening to person, and the big dumb strong army men are gonna come beat him up. In a way, I guess when you try and impose Marxist or Freudian frames, or you try and overread these movies, then you kind of miss the fact that some of this does play out in reality. There are the stereotypical like bro guys, who are going to try and like beat up the stereotypically intellectual people or mock them. I mean, reality is the playing out of these cliches, and that's kind of why they resonate with us as stories. So rather than just like, shift his identification from the heroes to the villain, as maybe he should in the case of like these the Euro trash villains that that ContraPoints is talking about. He just feels angry that he doesn't get to be portrayed, his sort of person doesn't get to be portrayed as the hero character, and everybody is fighting for their own cliche to be the hero character in the ideal story they want to see, and they're perpetually disappointed when everything they see is just a product of their society or whatever. I mean, all of these issues are kind of deeper, but that's kind of the point. I mean, just trying to impose these narrow and somewhat outmoded academic frames onto, a movie, as if all you really... In order to really understand a movie, first of all, you have to look beyond what appears before your eyes. You have to research its production. Who wrote it? What are they about? What else did they write? Understand, the movie system in general, all these other complexities to really get at what went into shaping a movie, and then perhaps you can actually critique it in any sort of intelligent way. But just in terms of like understanding storytelling in general, I would recommend this book, classic, Joseph Campbell, Hero with a Thousand Faces. Not that I would say that you should, read this and dogmatize, Campbell's point of view, but nonetheless, I think that looking at things more anthropologically is another example of a classic book in the genre of comparative religion, and religion being sort of the origin of a lot of this storytelling and social training. I mean, yes, there is a sort of a socializing element within storytelling, and thus within these newer mediums like television and the movies and that sort of thing. But it all runs a bit deeper than American society and movies that were made in the last 20 years. I think everyone should also watch the Flash Gordon serials from the mid-60s, the mid-30s, 30 years before that, because they're a great example of where the tropes are a bit more obvious, the racism is more obvious, the sexism is more obvious, and then people can appreciate this sort of progression of society that we have now, comparing it to modern characters and modern developments, and also see the progression of technology, filmmaking, film psychology, etc. But most of these sorts of academic attempts at critiquing movies just fail, because it's like they just walk in with their pet psychological theory, not realizing that the map is not the territory, and they impose a Marxist view or a Freudian view, which doesn't really account for all aspects of the movie, or just sort of distorts things in some sort of obnoxious way. And but they all come out convinced that they know the true meaning of the movie. The real meaning behind this is that it's to reinforce capitalist dogma, etc., etc. And that's why Marxists are tiresome.